China's killing our canola. $45 billion gone. Western farmers bleed. Mark Carney? Silent. Made millions off Beijing's dime. He won't fight. He's Beijing's banker, not our prime minister.
Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and welcome to the Candice Malcolm Show. We have a great episode for you today. I want to spend some time on the episode today drilling into the polls. I know a lot of you out there don't believe the polls. You don't trust the polls. We've seen a massive flip from the Conservatives over to the Liberals. And for so many people out there, it's hard to believe that it's true. Some of us just don't want to believe that it's true. It can't be true. How can Canadians be so naive to want to give Mark Carney and the Liberals another term in office? Why would we want to have a fourth term of this disastrous Liberal policies? Can Canadians really be so naive? Well, to help me dive into the polls and figure out whether they are right, whether they are misleading us, I am joined today by David Murray, who is our in-house pollster at Juno News. He works for One Persuasion, which is a government relations and strategy firm in Ontario, and he's been going out into the field and doing polls for us at Juno News. We're going to talk about those now. So David, thank you so much for joining the program.
Great to be with you.
Okay, so we had a poll last week, and we talked about how there were some signs in this poll that maybe the polls aren't right, that there is a Liberal mirage, or that the Liberals are kind of oversampled, or that the polls are over-exaggerating what they might be doing out there. So the top line of the poll showed that the Liberals maintain their lead, that they are still in majority government territory, as unbelievable as it sounds. They were polling at 41% in this poll, with the Conservatives down at 35%, which is quite low for the Conservatives. But then there was a couple of things lower down in the poll that might give us some sign of hope, sign of optimism. The first one was the results that you had in Quebec. So why don't you walk us through those?
Sure. So in Quebec, we found that actually 36% of those that responded are actually supported the Bloc Québécois this time, compared to 34% for the Liberals and 22% for the Conservatives. Now, this is a very big uptick for the Bloc Québécois, and I think that it's really important to note that it follows on the heels of some pretty serious gaffes in the Quebec campaign of Mark Carney. There was first of all, there was turning down the TVA debate. There was also getting his candidate's name wrong and misstating which massacre she actually survived. There's a few things that are very core to Quebec culture that simply do not fly, not to mention his his French skills at the same time. So seeing this bump to the Bloc Québécois makes sense in our poll. I know there's other pollsters that are showing that it's a bit of a deficit still, but I'm fairly confident that given this, I think we'll start to see more and more people come out and show the Bloc up on the upswing in the province of Quebec.
And so without Quebec, does Mark Carney still have that path towards majority, or is he really reliant on a strong showing in Quebec in order to win this election?
It is very much core and central to their campaign objectives, like being very strong on the island of Montreal, and then over in the Laurentides, like up around like north of Ottawa, that area, and down into the eastern townships. Like those are places that the Liberals hold like 20, 30 seats. Like when you're talking about the difference between a majority and minority government, like that is absolutely critical for him to get.
Okay, so they're not doing as well in Quebec as they might like to. Interestingly, you noted that this is the only poll showing that. So all of the other pollsters out there are not showing this surge for the Bloc, and you were sort of the outlier in that. What should we read into that discrepancy?
Well, there's different methodologies, different people that are able to be surveyed. We use online panels for ours. That's very different from interactive voice recognition, which is IVR used by many other pollsters as well. Like they just reach fundamentally different people.
Interesting. Okay, so the fact that we are quite different there is one thing. And then we did something different on this last poll, the last time we were out in the field, which is that we asked Canadians who they think their neighbors would be voting for. And this is something interesting that I read about in the American election, that one of the pollsters that really got it right when most of the other pollsters were wrong in the US were using this method. And the reason that they ask, who do you think your neighbors are voting for, is because that might give signals that the individual might not want to tell the pollster. Like, we know that there's a phenomenon in the States about a shy conservative or a shy Trump voter, where Americans who vote and support Republicans basically have such distrust for the legacy media and their pollsters that they don't want to tell the pollster the truth, that they'll just either lie and say they're voting for the other candidate, or they'll hang up the phone and they won't answer. But then when asked this question of who is your neighbor voting, or who are the people in your community voting for, people might be more open to saying the truth, to saying, oh, I'm not going to tell you who I'm voting for, but I will tell you that my neighbors and everyone in my community is supporting the right-wing candidate, or the conservatives, or in the US, Donald Trump. So that was the idea as to why we wanted to ask this neighbor question. Why don't you walk us through what the results looked like?
Sure. So, and this is not just a U.S. phenomenon. This has been tried in multiple different types of electoral systems. This was used in the French presidential election, and also in the Bundestag election in Germany as well, which was also very well studied for this phenomenon. So actually what we found was that the Conservatives were 4 points ahead when you asked this neighbor question. And that's including 34% of people saying simply, I do not know, which is totally fair. But it showed 29% of people said that their neighbors, people in their community, were voting for the Conservatives, and 25% were voting Liberal. So like, when we also looked at it in Ontario specifically, in our regular poll, we have the Conservatives down by 9. But when we look at this, ask this question specifically in Ontario, they're statistically tied. Like, it's 28% for Conservatives, 29% for the Liberals. And what's also very interesting about this is when you actually broke this down by how people say they're voting, how does that actually translate to how they think their neighbors are voting? If you're voting Conservatives, for the Conservatives, 59% of people that are voting Conservatives also believe that their neighbors are voting Conservatives. Whereas for the Liberals, 42% of those that are voting for the Liberals also believe that their neighbors are voting for the Liberals. And then for the NDP, this kind of reinforces some of the collapse narrative that we've seen play throughout this election for the NDP. It's down to 37% of those that support the NDP say their neighbors are supporting the NDP as well.
That is unbelievable. So even though our poll shows that the Liberals would be up 6% according to the methodology used, when it comes to who your neighbors vote for, the Conservatives actually have the lead, which is interesting, because if the reality out there is that the Liberals are cruising towards a majority, you would think that people would know that, and they would talk to their friends and family and hear people say, I'm voting Liberal, I'm voting Mark Carney. But that doesn't really seem to be the case. It seems that more people are actually hearing the opposite, that people in their community, their friends and family, their neighbors, are supportive of Pierre Poilievre, which, David, I mean, if I'm just going to trust my gut and what I'm seeing on the campaign, look, Mark Carney had his launch event in Nepean over the weekend, and someone counted that there was 47 people in the room. 47 people, okay? I think I had more at my son's birthday party last month. Whereas Pierre Poilievre is having these massive rallies, some of the biggest rallies in Canadian history, thousands upon thousands of people. I think that there was 4,500 reported in Hamilton last week. Over the weekend, we saw 5,000 people in Surrey. This isn't like a downtown convention center that anyone can just wander into. This is like something that you have to drive. You can't even take public transit. You have to drive, you have to coordinate, you have to carpool, you have to figure out a way to get to this. And to me, the excitement and the enthusiasm is behind Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. And maybe that is what this neighbor poll is showing, that is where the momentum is heading. That's where the enthusiasm is headed. What do you think?
I absolutely agree with that. I think that, and we saw this during the leadership race as well, because like when we started to see massive people coming to our meet and greets, we knew we were onto something very special. It was a very engaged electorate. It was some people that they really believed the message that we were saying, which was that, like, if you work hard, you should be able to get ahead. And currently, after 10 years of the lost Liberal decade, it's not happening. And so like the need for change and embodying that change is actually a very, very powerful and engaging force, which is what which is what I think is really happening behind the scenes as well.
Well, it's so interesting, and I'm looking forward to. We have another poll in the field right now, and so we're going to get the results later this week. We'll have to have you back on later in the week to talk about that. But while we're on this one, I want to take your attention over to an Abacus data poll. So this was released on Sunday, March 30th. And according to David Coletto and Abacus poll, he has the Liberals and the Conservatives tied, but he says that the advantage would still be with the Carney Liberals. Perhaps that's because of the efficiency of their vote. We've seen that in the last two elections where the Conservatives have won the popular vote. They've received more votes across the country, but because the Liberals have just enough support and just enough ridings, they managed to come out ahead and get a minority government. So Abacus has 39-39. What this shows me, though, because I went back and I looked at the last 2 weeks of polling, David, and this is from 338, and so they put together, the legacy media's choice of their pollsters. And according to that group of pollsters, we're talking about Ecos and Ipsos and Main Street and all of the sort of legacy media go-to polls, they have the Liberals up in every single one of them. Every single one over the last 2 weeks has the Liberal ahead. I think you have to go back to, I think it's March 19th or March 20th before you have one that was tied or has the Conservatives up by 1 point. So the fact that Abacus has a tie, to me, that's also showing a shift. Last week we had you on and you said that we were seeing signs that Mark Carney had perhaps peaked. Is this another sign that maybe, according to their own pollsters, that the Liberals have peaked, they have no more room to grow, and they can only go down? And when you look at the last few days of media attention, we've just seen scandal after scandal after scandal for Mark Carney and the Liberals. The latest is this outrageous story of a Liberal MP saying that Canadians should turn over the Conservative MP to a bounty put on by the Chinese communist regime, and that he should be turned over to a Chinese consulate so they can deal with him. I think that there were several other scandals. Last week we learned that Mark Carney used a tax haven in Bermuda to save money on taxes so that he could avoid Canadian taxes. He took out a bank loan from the Chinese government's central bank or state bank. We're learning a lot of things about Mark Carney. Do you think any of those are starting to have an impact in the way that the electorate is viewing Mark Carney?
I do. And every day that the headline coming out of that campaign is negative is what we call $1 million mistake, because of the amount of advertising that's spent every single day by political parties. It works out to about $1 million a day. And so if you're not talking about your message and you're put on your heels and you're unable to really pierce through that negative narrative, like what we're seeing with Paul Chang right now, doesn't matter what he's saying on the campaign, it's going to result in, that's what the takeaway is going to be. And it's, in this business, it's typically death by 1,000 cuts. And when you talk about a lapse of judgment, which I think that the Paul Chang saga really points to that, like very definitively, to want to stand behind a person who literally made reference to a bounty on a conservative candidate. I think that typical everyday Canadians are going to see that at home, especially given that it's really it's not just more independent media that are reporting this. It was on the front page of the National Post and the Globe and Mail, and I believe in CBC has a story on this. Like, this is permeating into the Main Street side, and it really showcases a lack of judgment on behalf of Mr. Carney. So the question is, how much of this is going to permeate? Like, we even see that there's now calls for a criminal investigation with the RCMP on this. Like this drip, this further development into these stories are going to be like, this is issues management 101. You either want to kill a story, like make it go away as fast as possible, or if you have the persistent, like every day people hear about it for 5 seconds, that's what really forms people's opinions about leaders. And we saw this with the SNC-Lavalin scandal. It was not just the one-off issue. It was the successive the stories that started to come out, because of what Jody Wilson-Raybould did, or even the We Charity scandal, the new developments in that happened every single day. That's what really built the momentum that actually forced Bill Morneau to resign. So, like, these kind of dynamics, when they're happening in such a short campaign, it can be extremely damaging. And I think we're going to start to see that in the polls in the coming days.
I agree. I think this is one of the biggest bombshell of a story that I have seen. It's so unbelievable to me. Now, I just want to point this out because this is kind of amusing. The story broke on Friday, and at the time, no one was really talking about it, right? It was broken by an independent pro-democracy paper in Canada, a Chinese paper. And Juno News was one of the first people to pick it up. I think we might have been the first people to write about it. I wrote this on X. I said, this should be on the front page of every newspaper in Canada. The fact that it isn't tells you everything you need to know about our corrupt media, who have sold out to liberal parties, and the corrupt Liberal Party, who has sold out to China. Now, I think that this is one of those instances where I'm glad to say I've been proven wrong, because I thought that the media were going to ignore it. They did at first, they tried, but it just became such a huge story. Once you had international observers, Human Rights Watch, pro-democracy voices from China coming out, other MPs, including NDP MP Jenny Kwan, speaking about just how absolutely outrageous and unacceptable this is. And so to your point that it was on the front page of the National Post, albeit 2 days later than Juno News report on it, look, I'll take it. I think it's good that the media has been shamed into covering this important story. And I agree that I think Mark Carney has made a huge mistake. To your point, the thing that Mark Carney wants to be talking about is the trade war, because polls have showed, and you mentioned this in an earlier interview that we did, that when it comes to the main ballot box question, the country is still kind of split, right? Younger Canadians are still saying it's cost of living. More conservative-minded Canadians. I know that there's a lot of people in the comment section that are going to say, Candice, I'm a boomer, I'm older, and I still am voting for Poilievre, so don't just brush us all with the same liberal brush. I know. When I'm talking about the older generation, when I'm talking about boomers and saying that they're voting for Carney, not all of them. The good ones, God bless you, the ones watching this show, I know, it's still 55-45, right? It's just that the plurality or the majority of that age group tends to be more interested in the trade war as their top issue. Their top concern is Donald Trump. And those are the same people who are telling us that they're voting for the Liberals. So let's just go through some of the Abacus polls here. They asked which political party is best able to handle the impact on Donald Trump's decisions in Canada. 54% say that's the top issue, whereas which political party is best able to deliver a change in direction, 46%. And then I want to go to this post by Kirk Lubinov on X. And I know I showed this to folks in a video essay that I did last week on Mark Carney, but he points this out and it's just so crystal clear. You can see the most important factors when deciding who to vote for. So dealing with Trump, 50% of that older demographic, 60 years and older, 50% say that dealing with Trump is a top election issue, whereas all the other age groups, 18 to 29, 30 to 44, 44 to 59, the majority or plurality of all of those, like 47, 51, 48%, are all reducing the cost of living. And then you can see how that translates into votes, that chart on the bottom. Actually, this is so interesting, David. Younger Canadians are saying that they're voting conservative. I've never seen this in my life, but here it says 18 to 29-year-olds, so those would be like the Gen Zers. 40% are voting conservative. Wow. 30 to 39 and 40 to 49, we've got millennials and Gen Xers there saying conservative, 35%, 38%, 50 to 59-year-olds, 43% saying conservatives. Those are Gen X as well. And then the boomers, 50% liberal. It's the only demographic, according to this chart, that has the liberals up ahead. What do you make of all this?
I think it speaks to exactly why Mr. Poilievre's messaging has been working so far to date. And it's because he's, as I mentioned before, at the rallies, he makes a point of shaking everyone's hands and listening to their actual concerns. It becomes his own mini sample of Canadians basically every night that he does it, at least when we were doing him during the leadership race and whatnot. So hearing the concerns about Canada's promise, about the fact that people are working so hard and they can't get ahead because the cost of living has gone out of control. They can't afford the down payment on a house, and it takes them in Toronto. It takes as long to save for a down payment as it used to take to actually pay for the 25-year amortization for an average house with an average income. Like, these are like society destroying stats, right? Like, if you're talking about locking out an entire generation from the primary wealth building tool, like they're backed into a corner that they feel that there's literally no one that actually is listening to them except for Mr. Polyev. And so because he's been able to, number one, understand their issues at a level I've never seen with any other politician, but number two, the solutions that he actually puts forward are so practical and actually like are just such common sense. Like, say, for example, on housing, when he talks about like removing gatekeepers at the municipal level, understanding that like up to the biggest single cost when it comes to building housing is in fact government taxes, delays, and all that stuff. Like, this is stuff that it makes inherent sense because the land, the labor, and the construction materials don't come even close to the selling price. So like making sure that policy actually speaks to those very real concerns is something that he makes a huge effort in doing. And contrast that with the challenges faced by the older generation, the boomers specifically, who have assets. Like, generally speaking, home ownership is significantly higher under with this group of individuals. So if affordability and cost of living and home ownership are not nearly as big of an issue because you have inflation index pensions, like there's obviously always still cost pressures, but they're not nearly as pronounced as they would be for typically younger families who are just starting out and they want to have a family and they feel that they don't have the financial means to be able to do so. Like, there's just simply a different level of emphasis put on these issues by the older generation. So when they're sitting at home, they're retired and they're watching CBC or whatever, and they're seeing day in, day out the comments made by President of the United States, and it's very concerning. It's very belittling. It's like when he talks about 51st State, when he talks about like Governor Trudeau and things like that. Like, there's an emotional component to this that they're seeing on repeat every single day that certainly elevates this issue to the top of mind for this demographic way more than it would for people that are every single day going to work and are struggling to keep up with the cost of living.
Well, do you think that Mark Carney's more productive conversation? I mean, President Trump put out a post on social media last week after their call where he was quite respectful. You know, he didn't do the whole Governor Carney thing. He called him Prime Minister, and he said that they were probably going to have a great relationship. Do you think that in some ways actually hurts Carney and that kind of mitigates the issue? Or do you think that provides assurances for those voters to say, okay, Carney is the guy that can deal with Trump?
I think time will tell. I think that what this actually points to more than anything is the fact of the personal conflict that Mr. Trump had with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. I think that specifically on the governor stuff, I thought that was like very telling when he said that on Friday, like referring to him by his proper title as Prime Minister of Canada. I think that it much more speaks to like the fact that Trudeau, every single opportunity he got, would drag President Trump's name through the mud, would call, like, and Freeland would call as a slur the conservatives, the maple syrup MAGA conservatives and stuff like that. Like, this is just meant to be, but it was all meant to be effectively personal attacks on Mr. Trump just the second he left office. They had no idea that he was going to come back, right? So like I think time will tell as to exactly what the implications of this are. I think that if it's understood that the relationship, and we're going to see this on April 2nd, that's going to be very interesting to see if this actually continues. In terms of the level of debate and level of quorum that's enjoyed between the United States and Canada, I think that's going to be actually very indicative of kind of the future impact that this issue will have on the Canadian electorate. If it's something that Canadians feel like there's progress that can be made, that it's not simply just petty, just like name calling like Governor Trudeau and 51st State, because it's a very emotional issue. You're talking about something that you can't really counter with facts. This is about Canadian identity, Canadian culture, Canadian sovereignty at the end of the day. It's not inherently something that can be borne out with exclusively facts. So if there can be the temperature taken off that, if the sting of the pain can actually be removed, I think that's going to have a profound impact on how these debates move forward throughout the election.
Well, that'll be something really interesting to watch, David. Okay, I have one final question for you. I just plugged in 338's federal projections. So they take all of the, again, take it with a grain of salt because it's the legacy media and their pollsters exclusively. But here they have their projections if an election were to take place now, I suppose. Here it shows that the Liberals, this is the average of all the polls, has 42% of the popular vote, which would translate to approximately 187 seats, which is enough for a majority. You can see the range there is 162 all the way up to 217. Oh my goodness, goodness gracious. If Canadians give the Liberals a fourth term with 217 seats, I don't know. I don't know if I can take it. But here it shows the Conservatives with 38%. Again, 38% in some years is enough to actually win the election, 38% of the vote. But you can see how that translates into seats, approximately 129 seats. The range is 102 to 152. So potentially very close, but it still shows Liberals ahead. Now, this is the thing that I want to point out to you, because here the third place party would be the Bloc with approximately 6% of the voting. Obviously, that's national, so it's much more dense. In Quebec, it would translate to 21 seats approximately. But look at the NDP in single digits, 9%. They estimate the NDP getting approximately 5 seats. Again, this is if an election were held today, and again, grain of salt because it's the legacy media's pollsters, an average of them. But look at the range of seats, David, 0 to 12. 0. That is part of the possibility in this universe that the NDP could get completely wiped out down to 0 seats. Unbelievable. This is such an interesting proposition because, like, would Canada be a better country if we just had 2 parties, kind of like the Democrats and the Republicans, or in the UK you have the Labour and the Conservatives, just a true right-wing party and a left-wing party, left and right, and not have this weird situation where you have multiple parties? I mean, I think that it might spell trouble for the Conservatives, given that it seems that there are more left-wing voters in Canada than there are Conservative voters. But I can't overstate this enough, that the NDP might get completely wiped out down to 0 seats. What do you think?
I'm not enthusiastic about this proposition at all. And also, 217 MPs for any party is going to be challenging no matter what. But the fact of the matter is, if the NDP is relegated down to minivan status, like we saw the Ontario Liberals under Kathleen Wynne, that's a problem for the country, as far as I'm concerned. I think there's always going to be a cohort of the more hardcore socialist side of Canadians, and even in the UK they have the Labour, they have Conservative, but they also have the Liberal Democrats as well, and also the SNP at the same time, that also provide different policy angles and different perspectives as well. But I think that what really separates us, especially from the UK, is the fact that in the UK they actually have like significant powers given to individual MPs to hold their own leaders accountable when it's in their own caucuses. We really don't have those powers. Like we have some through the Reform Act of Michael Chong, but fundamentally it's whoever sits in the executive side of that party, whoever's in the Prime Minister's office or the leader of the opposition. There's a significant amount of power that they have, much more than you'd see in the United Kingdom. We saw Liz Truss, we saw Theresa May get forced out by her own colleagues. I think that operates as a necessary check and balance within their system. Translate that over to ours. If we have a 2-party system where you have a right wing and a left wing, and you have a coalition of Bay Street bankers plus the Champagne socialists, and then trying to get into the working class blue collar, like we would try if you tried to imagine a marriage of NDP and Liberal Party, like that would be like whoever becomes the leader is going to have significant power without the necessary checks to be able to keep the entire coalition happy. And so depending on what happens in the leadership race, which you can, based on your tactics of campaigning, based on your proficiency, you could have some fairly extremist folks in those seats of power. Now, mind you, we also can make that argument that's still happening today with what we see through Mark Carney, through what we've seen through the legacy of Prime Minister Trudeau. But I think that reducing it down to two parties makes that even more likely. And I think that's just fundamentally not helpful for the Canadian political discourse.
Well, it's so interesting that Mark Carney, a banker, a wealthy multimillionaire who's, made his money working at Goldman Sachs, is somehow the party leader that may decimate the left-wing party. The fact that they don't have a viable criticism of Mark Carney from the political left. There's so much room there, considering that Mark Carney has tacked to the right and is copying Pierre Poilievre's very conservative policies. You would think that there would be a huge opportunity for the Social Democrats and the NDP in this country. The fact that they don't, I think that Canadians are taking their frustration of the last 9 years out on Jagmeet Singh, because Justin Trudeau's gone now. They see that Mark Carney is different enough, even though those of us who pay attention know that he's not. But to the average Canadian that's not paying close attention, they see him as a new face, and they still see the old Jagmeet Singh, the guy that propped up Justin Trudeau. He's being punished in the polls. Pierre Poilievre's doing great. He's got huge rallies. He's got a great team around him. He's still averaging 38%, which again is enough to win in other elections in the past. Conservatives have won with 38%. And the fact that he's not winning doesn't really have a lot to do with what he's doing, but it has more to do with the total collapse of the NDP and how many, many NDP voters are running to Mark Carney and the Liberals as a countervailing force to Donald Trump. We had a reporter on the ground at Nathan Phillips Square during that Elbows Up rally, Noah Jarvis. He was talking to people on the ground there. He spoke to a lot of people who are lifelong NDP supporters who've never voted Liberal in their life, but will be voting Liberal this time around, because of that reason, that they want to stop Donald Trump. And so I think, again, this is the biggest story of the campaign so far. The campaign is far from over. We still have 3 weeks left to go, and so much can happen. We're really looking forward to those debates because Pierre Poilievre is such a skilled debater, and I think that will give him a huge opportunity to point out to Canadians some of the flaws with Mark Carney. But he certainly has his work cut out for him just with the various factors that are beyond his control. Well, David Murray, you're our in-house pollster at Juno News this election cycle. Usually we put these interviews behind our paywall. So I've been having a weekly session with David. They provide us our own unique numbers, which we publish every week. We do ridings to watch. So David has picked, I think, a couple of dozen or a dozen or two swing ridings, which will determine the election. And we have tons of data and a really interesting analysis of each of those ridings. So all of that information is exclusive to our paid subscribers over at Juno News. You can subscribe for as little as $10 a month. So the price of, lunch at Tim Hortons or a couple of coffees. Instead, come over, support independent media. You get access to all of our exclusive polling, all of these conversations that we're having, and much, much more. A lot of our interviews and investigative research and our documentaries are behind that paywall. So we really encourage you to head on over, subscribe, support our work, support independent pollsters like David Murray as well. David, thank you so much for your time, and we're really looking forward to your next report later this week.
See you soon.
All right, folks, thanks so much for tuning in. That's all the time we have for today. We'll be back again tomorrow with all the news. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you, and God bless.